Hi all, Wind here. In today's video, we're going to go over ServiceNow tables and everything you need to know about them. Have you ever wondered where all the data in ServiceNow is actually stored? Incidents, users, requests, tasks, everything in ServiceNow lives somewhere behind the scenes, and the answer is tables. Now in this video, I'll explain ServiceNow tables in the simplest way possible, including how they work, why they matter, and how you can view and use them inside the platform. So if you're learning ServiceNow, this concept is absolutely essential, and we will talk about why tables are so important at the end of the video. So please watch until then. Now, let's go into the main crux. What are tables in ServiceNow? Now in ServiceNow, a table is where records and data are stored. So at this moment in time, you are looking at the list view of incidents and essentially looking at the incident table or the list of records within the incident table. If you're familiar with databases, a table works just like a spreadsheet. So think of it like this. The rows here, so I'm just going to highlight a few, as you can see here, these rows are equal to records. Columns are equals to fields. So these columns here is showing the field open, short description, for each of these particular records. And essentially, the table is a collection of all of this related data. So, for example, this instance table stores all incident records, and the user table stores information about users. So essentially, if we see here, this is highlighted and also can be clicked. This is essentially what we call a reference field and is a related field to a different table. So essentially, caller is its own table, which is referencing the user table. Assignment group is essentially referencing the user group table or the group table. Every time someone creates an incident, this information is saved into this specific incident table. Let's talk about some common ServiceNow tables. So we briefly talked about incident that stores all the incident records. It's probably one of the main tables in terms of IT operations. The user table is essentially the main table where it stores your users like names, email, department, essentially all the employees as well as agents in your organization. Task table is a parent table that many other tables extend from. We'll talk about table relationships and structure later on in the video. Change requests, another very common table which is used for managing change management processes. Service requests stores service request information submitted to the service portal. Now I won't go through any of these tables, and if you don't know how to find it, essentially please do watch my previous video where I talk about how to find it and how to essentially view others. But just to give a very quick recap, you can essentially find any table from the application navigator. So it's essentially, if I was to type in change requests, change, I can see here. So essentially if I click all, this will take me to the list of all change requests, and similarly with users and so on and so forth. There is a very quick shortcut that I'll quickly share. If you do know the table name, not the table label, but the table name, and we'll go into what that means and what that looks like. If you do know the table name, you could always just go to the table itself. So for example, do incident.list, it will take me to the list view of the incident. Similarly with user, but this is where you do need to know the table name, not just the layout. This will take you to the user table. So understanding these tables is important because almost everything in ServiceNow is built around them. So let's go back to the incident list view, and essentially we're going to talk about the table structure. So every table in ServiceNow has a specific structure. There are three key components: fields. Fields are the column that stores the information. Examples include short description, as you see here, priority, assign to, state. Then we have records. Records are the rows in the tables. Again, each record represents one entry. So for example, one incident ticket equals one record. Now, we can see all of this in a table schema. Now the schema defines how the table is structured and how it relates to other tables. So you can actually see the schema in ServiceNow. So let's show where that is stored. So essentially, if I type in table, and let's So under system definition, tables and columns, that's essentially the one you want to go to. So if I select that, this will take me to this view here. Now in this view, first of all, it shows all the tables, so it can be very daunting. There is a little bit of a trick. So if you select any table here, or any record here, and then essentially search for the table you're looking for. So we're going to go for incident at this moment of time. And if I just type in INC very quickly, it will take me to the incident. So when you highlight a table, essentially you can click on the schema map. Now, if you don't select the table, it will prompt you to select one. Now, when we select the schema map, it'll open a new screen. And essentially what this shows is all the referenced tables, the referencing tables, the extended tables, and the extending tables. And we will go through kind of the relationships one by one, but essentially, let's look at all the tables, and we'll go from right to left because I think that's the easier one. So all the tables are extending incidents. So at this moment in time, there is nothing extending from incident. Task is the parent table of incident, and we'll showcase how task looks like, so it might make more sense. But essentially, this shows any tables where they are a child of a parent. If we look at extended tables, we can see that incident is a child of task. If we then look at referencing tables, so we look at all the tables that essentially reference incident, we have incident tasks. So this is where we talk about where's a specific related reference to incident. Incident task has a related field that references the incident table. And then we should show any tables that essentially referenced. So incident references the CI table, CMDB CI table, the service, location, problem, change request, group. So when we go back to the list view, just to kind of drive this home a little bit. So when we talked about the incident view and having fields that are related to other tables, so essentially open the incident table. Let's look at the incident table. So the incident table, so this is a reference table or reference to the user table, and then essentially assigned group is reference to the group table. So when we go back to this view here, we can see that there is a reference to group. We can then see all the columns within that table, and similarly with user, user, we can see the user table and the columns to it. So this is essentially a very nice schema map. So now let's go back slightly and let's look at task. So again, little trick, select anything and then just type in as quick as you can as much of the word as possible essentially. So for this I just typed in TA and it came to task, but you'll see if I type in T essentially, so if I let's go back up, if I type in T, take me to the first T. So the more I type of the word, the more likely you will get to the required table, or the table you require. So let's now go to schema map of task, and what you're going to see here, so let's again go one by one just to quickly go over this. So show extended tables. So these are all the tables that essentially extend from task. So you see here there are quite a lot of tables that extend from task. If we then look at any tables that task is extended from, there is none. So task is parent, and a sole parent essentially. Task is not a child of any other table. If we look at the referencing tables, so what are the tables that essentially reference tasks, we can see here. So locations affected, task SLA, CMDB. If we then see the referenced tables, we can see all these tables essentially are referenced. Okay. I hope that's helped. Again, just to be very clear, you can see the task columns and the columns of the table itself. So we can see here reference to the record producer, reference to transfer order, and so on and so forth. So this just gives you kind of the columns essentially to that table. Now, let's go over table hierarchy. What does it actually mean when we say parent and child relationship? So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to now show the table very quickly. So before we go into table hierarchy, it actually might be best to show how we view tables in ServiceNow. So there's a few ways to essentially view tables in ServiceNow. So essentially, if you were to go to table and essentially find the system definition, tables, and then essentially here you can search for a table. So if I search in the label, incident, and then essentially select this takes me to the table. There are two other ways to do this, and I'll show each one just so you are aware of it. So first of all, if we go to the incident list view, so essentially if I go to all, and when I'm in this view, essentially I can click configure, go to table, and this will take me to that same view. Now, there is a way to do a shorthand, so of course similar to how we do incident.list, if we were to type in incident.config, this will take me also to that table view. It is a little bit different of a view, and I do prefer going through one of the two other ways essentially, but just a very shorthand where you can see all the dictionary entries essentially, but you do miss some of the kind of fields above these lists. So essentially what this does show what this does show is kind of all other areas like notifications, UI actions, ACLs, UI policies. So it does provide a bit more information than some of the other than the other view that I'm going to show you now, but it's really down to what you're trying to look at that point in time or for the particular table. So let's go through this normal view. So we'll go to table. And I'll just go back actually, because I do believe that view that I was talking about, you can access it from here as well. So if I just go to all, I think it's going to take you to the same view. Yeah, so essentially this view here. So now let's just go back and go to configure table specifically. Okay, so we talked about how you can view tables. Now let's essentially look at what does this mean. So first of all, this is the label of the table. So this is the display name for the table, and this can be localized. So you could essentially change the label of the tables. However, what you cannot change after you create the table or it is out of the box, depending, essentially is the name. And this is the dictionary, the internal name of the table that cannot later be changed. And this essentially is where you use this table name for any calls to the table in scripts. So it is very crucial that you get this right. If you're creating a table, make sure that the name is clear. However, the name is more of the dictionary, so it will not be displayed to users. It's really only for the back end, so sort of developers and architects essentially required to use that table. But you can change the label to it. So essentially, if you change this to anything else, and if you search in the application navigator, it should essentially bring this back, the new version, whatever you put in. So let's quickly talk about application. So application is essentially a packaged set of modules, tables, scripts, and UI components. So generally, most tables are within global, but there are other products like HR, CSM, customer service management, that are essentially in their own application, and essentially just means they're their own package set of items, and they can speak to other tables in global, but you would essentially need to build cross-scope privileges. So just be aware that application is very crucial. Generally, you want to stick with global, but if you are working on other tables that are packaged in a separate way, or you're creating your own application, then essentially you want to ensure that the table is on the right application. Remote table. Now, a remote table in ServiceNow is essentially defining if this table is a specialized table type which is only used to display real-time, read-only data from external sources, such as API or another instance, without actually storing it in the local ServiceNow database. So this flag is very important, and very important in the sense that if you do have a very good use case to actually only pull in data real time when you just need to see it when someone goes to the table and it's coming from a separate source, then it actually saves a lot of memory. So it's very crucial, but generally you would just store the information in ServiceNow for most use cases, such as incidents, such as requests. However, it might be a use case where essentially you just want to pull data for that particular moment. So just be aware of that. Then we talk about columns. Now these are essentially the table columns. Now, when we look at these columns, you can see the label, the type, and the reference. Now, the reference indicates that this particular column is actually referencing a different table. So we see here this is referencing the problem table, so the problem label. The caller is referencing the user. Resolve by is referencing the user. And essentially, you can have some default values, and this is actually calling a script to actually get the caller of the incident. But essentially, as you can see here, there are also some default values around numbers, depending on the type. So one thing I want to call out here, what you are potentially seeing is these are the dictionary entries for incident. However, not all of these fields actually live only on incident. So what I mean by that, when we talk about parent and child, and I'm just going to add in another column just to kind of showcase this. When we talk about parent and child, when a parent table is or when a child table is extended from parent, it inherits all of the parent's fields. And essentially, if you go to the task table, all the child records will appear in that parent table. So incident records appear in task table, so do problems, so do changes, and so forth. However, in the child table, you can have additional fields and additional columns that are essentially specific to that table. So if you were to go to tasks and you search for something that is a specific field to incident, you would not be able to find it in that view. But if you go to the incident table, you would. And similar with problem and change requests and so on and so forth. So how do we know what fields are within the incident table and which aren't? Now, this is the crucial column here, so table. So we see here we have resolved, and this is specific to the incident table. If I then keep scrolling down, I can see kind of all of these fields essentially to incident. I'm just going to go to the next page. We can see here these fields, task type, domain path, contract, service, are related to tasks. Essentially, these live in the task table. So you will be able to see all of these in tasks, and they're inherited by the child. Now, essentially, what you can do, and this might be actually for a later video, is setting dictionary overrides for essentially any fields that you want to kind of optimize for this specific table. So if you essentially want to default it differently for a child than a parent, or from amongst other siblings of that parent, then essentially you could. But that's essentially a more advanced feature, and we'll go through it in another video if you guys do want to watch it. So essentially, why do we need to know about hierarchy? Well, hierarchy helps reduce duplication and maintain consistency across the platform. So you should be aware of hierarchy in the sense of knowing how tables work, how they inherit fields, and how you can essentially then find the right records and data in the right places. Essentially, if you also look to create a new table, knowing if it should extend from a parent or not is a very crucial step. So let's talk about why tables are important. Now, tables are one of the most important concepts in ServiceNow because they power everything behind the scenes. Now, they allow platforms to store data efficiently, create relationships between records, build applications quickly, support automation and workflows, One of the most very crucial points from my perspective is reporting. Knowing how tables work and how they relate to each other is very crucial when you're trying to report on certain aspects of an incident or on the platform itself, or providing a report that helps people understand the data. If you understand the tables well, you can essentially know how to report, how to drive into the related fields, dot walk into certain columns from a child or related table, reference table. So if you understand tables very well, learning ServiceNow becomes much easier. Let's quickly recap what we covered today. So we learned what ServiceNow tables are, how the data is stored in the tables, common tables used in ServiceNow, the table structure and hierarchy, and how to view tables on the platform. So these concepts form the foundation for ServiceNow administration and development. I hope you found this video helpful. Please make sure to like the video if this was helpful. Comment if you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to dive in deeper for anything that you guys question or ask. And I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you. Bye.